A young man with blonde hair stands outside a grand mansion. The young man approaches a wooden door and knocks twice, calling out for Eleanor-sama. After a moment, he announces that he is coming in and opens the door. The young man Arcs reveals he was reincarnated as a background character in an otome game. The yandere villainess Eleanor fell in love with him. As Eleanor hugs Arcs, another man bursts in and asks where he has been. Arcs explains the game is set in the Celestia Kingdom. He recalls that in the original story, the villainess Eleanor was known for her extreme actions. He explains that his name Arcs Leafort never appeared in any of the game's story branches. In the original game, he was a background character with no impact on the plot. Arcs considers his minor role. He tells himself that being a background character is fine. Unlike typical reincarnated protagonists who use past knowledge to gain power, Arcs has few memories of his previous life. He only remembers that he lived in a country called Japan. However, his memories of this specific otome game are perfectly intact. In this new life, Arcs has no family. He lives at the orphanage that took him in. Arcs wonders why he was reincarnated into this world. Arcs thinks about what it would be like to be a main character. He imagines using magic or attending school with the others. Despite his situation, he believes that even a background character might find an opportunity. Arcs resolves to make the best of his situation and enjoy his life in this new world for the time being. Sometime later, Arcs is shown training with a wooden sword. He engages in a sparring match with an adult from his village and lands a decisive blow. The match concludes and Arcs is declared the winner. The defeated man praises Arcs for his skill as a crowd of villagers cheers. They comment that he has managed to beat all the adults in the village. A child from the orphanage asks Arcs if they too can become that strong through training. Arcs tells the child that it's possible. In his thoughts, Arcs admits he only trained to become strong because he was bored, citing the lack of online games in this world. He dismisses his own strength, thinking it is only useful for fending off local monsters, and that he could never become a knight. The director of the orphanage approaches Arcs and congratulates him on his victory. The director claps his hands and praises Arcs's accomplishment. He tells Arcs that he is sure he will make a fine knight one day. Arcs replies that it is impossible for a commoner like him. The director pats Arcs's head, telling him that someone as wise and strong as he is can become a knight. He remarks on how much the boy has grown. After praising him, the director informs Arcs that he has a favor to ask. The scene shifts, and Arcs is now sitting inside a grand, unfamiliar mansion. Arcs asks the director if they are supposed to be there. The director explains that someone wants to see him as a large door begins to open. A man enters the room apologizing for being late. He introduces himself as Adalbert Ancinous the Count, who governs the region. Arcs reacts to being in the presence of a count. He introduces himself as Arcs Leafort. The count confirms with the orphanage director that this is the boy they had spoken about. The director praises Arcs, calling him a capable child, despite having some flaws. Adalbert tells Arcs that he has heard about his achievements. He explains that he has called him here to ask an important favor, making Arcs wonder what a noble could want from him. The count asks Arcs if he would be willing to become a friend to his daughter. Arcs reacts to the unexpected request. Arcs internally questions why an orphan was summoned for this, assuming the daughter must have a bad personality or an illness. The count explains that his daughter does possess a troublesome nature. The name Ancinous sparks a thought in Arcs's mind, and he begins to ponder its significance. While Arcs is lost in thought, the count calls for his daughter Eleanor to enter the room. A young girl with dark hair appears and introduces herself as Eleanor Ancinous. Arcs reacts upon seeing her. Arcs recognizes her name and face from the game. He remembers that Eleanor Ancinous is the villainess who harassed the game's protagonist with curses. He recalls that in the original story she was the root of all evil and the final boss. Arcs processes the realization that they want him to become friends with such a person. Count Ancinous expresses his confidence that the two will become good friends. He then encourages them to go and talk for a while. Arcs and Eleanor walk through the mansion's garden. He internally notes that the garden is wonderful and never gets boring to look at. Despite the scenery, there is a heavy silence between them. Arcs thinks to himself about how awkward the situation is. He remembers the count mentioning that his daughter, nicknamed Ellens, is the same age as him. The count had also asked if Arcs thought she was cute, a sentiment Arcs now reconsiders. As they walk, Arx reflects on Eleanor's stoic demeanor, finding it hard to believe a child can be so expressionless. Still, he admits to himself that she is cute as befits a game's main character. He is captivated by her appearance, having never seen a girl with black hair and black eyes before. Eleanor abruptly stops and turns to face Arx. Breaking their long silence, she asks if something is wrong. Before he can respond, she lowers her head, her dark hair falling forward to obscure her face. She takes a small step back. Arx calls out her name to get her attention. Arx reaches a hand toward her, asking if she is feeling unwell and suggesting they return to the mansion. Looking up with a sad expression, Eleanor says she knew it and asks if he really doesn't want to be her friend. Arx is taken aback by her question. He stares at her, unsure how to respond. Eleanor says she understands, assuming he wants nothing to do with someone as accursed as she is. Arx starts to object. She cuts him off, telling him it's fine, and that he doesn't need to hide his feelings. She explains that everyone else felt the same way. A flashback shows people whispering about her, identifying her as the girl from the Antsiness family, and commenting that she is just as the rumors described. The whispers continue as people warn each other to keep their distance, fearing misfortune will befall anyone who gets near her. Others remark on the lack of light in her eyes, calling her a cursed child. They find her black hair and black eyes terrifying. Eleanor narrates that some people tried to get close to her, but their only motive was to curry favor with her noble family. The flashback shows a woman recoiling from Eleanor with a shriek. Eleanor explains that people believed she possessed a magical power that could kill them. She says that eventually everyone stopped speaking to her and would only give her hateful looks. Arx stares silent after her revelation. Turning away from him, Eleanor says she is already used to being treated this way. She reaches her hand toward a nearby flower bush. She tells Arx she knows people's fear is the correct reaction. Before her hand makes contact, the flowers begin to wilt and turn black. Arx watches. He internally recognizes this as Eleanor's magic. He has never seen power on this level before. Eleanor tells him to see for himself what happens. She explains that everything she touches loses its color, withers, and dies. She clarifies that her curse affects people as well as plants. Looking at her, Arx says her name softly. Eleanor gives a sad smile and asks if he understands now, stating that she is a cursed child. Arx thinks about how he never knew she had to endure such suffering. He wonders if saving her now could change her fate. He recalls Count Adalbert's request for him to become his daughter's friend. Arx reflects on his reincarnation, questioning if this was the reason he was brought to this world. He resolves to put the story back on its proper course and reach this world's happy ending. To achieve his goal, Arx knows he must become close with Eleanor. He decides he must befriend her to avoid the bad end. Arx states his goal is to create a future where no one suffers and declares he will achieve a happy ending that includes Eleanor. Facing her, Arx tells Eleanor he does not find her appearance creepy or frightening. He then tells her how he sees her. With a blush, Arx shouts that he thinks she is beautiful. Eleanor blushes and stammers, unable to comprehend his words. She thanks him but insists that her power is dangerous, reminding him that she could hurt someone. Arx agrees it is a possibility but suggests there is a better way to use her power. He holds his hand over the withered flowers, causing them to bloom again. He reaches his hand toward Eleanor and promises that if she hurts someone, he will find a way to handle it. Holding the newly bloomed flowers, Eleanor listens as Arx asks her to be his friend. A flashback to Eleanor's childhood begins. She remembers people calling her a devil and a filthy crow, screaming at her to stay away. In the memory, a young Eleanor sees the silhouette of a woman and calls out for her mother. Eleanor recalls her fear as a child. The flashback shows her mother, a woman with long, light-colored hair, holding her hand as a young Eleanor looks up at her. Her mother looks down at her with a cold expression and tells Eleanor to stop looking at her with those eyes. In response to her mother's rejection, the young Eleanor is left speechless. Alone, the young Eleanor clasps her hands together and repeatedly apologizes for her existence. The flashback concludes with the young Eleanor alone apologizing for being born. Returning to the present, Eleanor gasps as she wakes up in her bed. Arx is by her side, calling out her name. Arx leans in with a concerned expression and asks Eleanor if she is okay, telling her it looked like she was having a nightmare. Eleanor sits up looking disoriented and asks Arx what he is talking about. Arx explains that they had been talking in her room. He continues, stating that she must have been very tired because she fell asleep. With a smile, Arx suggests her exhaustion is what caused the bad dream. Eleanor stares at him without saying a word. Arx looks back at her and calls her name questioningly. Eleanor's eyes well up with tears. Arx is taken aback by her sudden crying, unsure what caused it. As Eleanor begins to sob, Arx flails his arms, not knowing how to handle the situation. Eleanor covers her face and continues to cry. Arx hesitantly reaches a hand toward her. Arx pulls Eleanor into a hug and gently pats her on the back. Eleanor clutches Arx's shirt as he continues to hold her. While being held, Eleanor feels her heart thump in her chest. As Arx holds her, Eleanor remembers him asking to be her friend. She thinks that she finally has a friend. A flashback shows their earlier conversation in a garden. Eleanor told Arx that being with her would only make him unhappy, but he insisted it would make him happy. In the memory, Eleanor warns Arx that her curse might hurt him. Arx replies that everyone hurts someone at some point in their lives. Eleanor tells him that he would be better off with another friend. Arx grabs her shoulders, calling out her name. He declares that she is the only friend he wants. Eleanor hesitates for a moment. She accepts his offer of friendship, asking him to take care of her. The scene returns to the present in Eleanor's bedroom. Pulling away from their hug, Eleanor apologizes to Arx for crying. Arx tells her not to apologize. He pats his chest, saying it is always available for her. Eleanor smiles faintly and tells Arx that he is very kind. Arx smiles back and says he was just doing what a friend would do. Hearing the word friend, Eleanor's expression changes. Eleanor thinks that she has never had an ally, let alone a friend. She wonders if she can be the kind of friend Arx is. Clutching her blanket, she tells herself that it will be fine. Arx tells her that friendship takes many forms, and for him he does what feels right. He adds that as she makes more friends, she will figure things out for herself. Arx states that communication is a skill that requires practice. Eleanor stares at Arx with a blank expression, processing his words. After a moment, she smiles and agrees they should take things slowly. Arx smiles back and begins to say that after all, he looks toward the window and finishes his that life is much longer than they realize. A few weeks later, Arx has a tired, deadpan expression. Eleanor's demeanor has changed. She calls out to Arx, showing him flowers she has made bloom with her magic. She offers Arx pastries from a tea set she is holding. While they look at the night sky together, Eleanor points upwards and asks Arx if the stars are beautiful. Arx thinks to himself that her sudden change is unbelievable. Eleanor leans in close with a pout and asks if he is listening to her. Despite her personality shift, Arx thinks to himself that he is happy because she is cute. Arx smiles at Eleanor. He apologizes and explains that he was lost in thought. Eleanor puffs out her cheeks and asks what he was thinking about. She asks if there was something more important than her question. Taking her hand, Arx reassures her that is not the case. Looking at her, Arx declares that nothing is more important to him than she is. Eleanor is silent for a moment after his statement. Arx continues, explaining that he, Arx Leafort, believes himself to be quite handsome. He gives a thumbs up while imagining girls fawning over him. Eleanor dismisses his comment and pushes him forward, telling him to say what kind of clothes he likes. As Arx begins to consider his taste in clothes, there is a knock at the door. Count Adalbert Ancinous enters the room and asks if he can have a moment with Arx. Eleanor quietly says her father's name as Arx looks toward the Count. Adalbert apologizes to Eleanor, explaining that he needs to borrow Arx. He gestures for Arx to follow him. As he walks toward the Count, Arx glances over his shoulder at Eleanor. He sees her expression and realizes she is angry about the interruption. Eleanor turns away, stating that it does not matter to her. She adds that Arx has been absent-minded recently. Arx sighs and smiles. Arx steps closer and calls out Eleanor's name. He leans in, bringing his face close to hers. Arx whispers that if they are discussing something for her to wear, then anything would look beautiful on her. Eleanor blushes and is left speechless. As he leaves the room with Count Adalbert, Arx waves to Eleanor. In the Count's office, Adalbert informs Arx that his earlier request has been approved. Arx's eyes widen. The Count confirms that starting next week, Arx will officially be part of the Ancinous household. Arx bows deeply and thanks him. Adalbert pauses, stroking his chin. He tells Arx there is something he needs to ask. While holding a new uniform for Arx, the Count asks if he is okay with this arrangement. Arx explains that it saves him the trouble of commuting and that he is grateful for the job. The Count remarks that he could have simply provided a place for Arx to stay. Arx states that he has no intention of exploiting Count Adalbert's authority. The Count remarks on Arcs's maturity, stating it is admirable for a 7-year-old to say such a thing. Arcs smiles and says the Count must have recognized this quality in him, which is why he was chosen to be Eleanor's friend. Count Adalbert smiles. Arcs says he will do his best, but before he begins his official duties, there is one thing he must do first. The scene changes as Arcs walks toward Eleanor's room. Arcs peeks into the room and sees Eleanor with a displeased expression. He realizes she is upset about his long absence. He knocks and calls out to Eleanor. She remains seated on a chair looking away from him. Eleanor asks Arcs why he was so late. She questions if he enjoyed talking with her father so much that he forgot she was waiting for him. Dressed in a new attendance uniform, Arcs formally apologizes for his tardiness, addressing her as Milady. He bows low, introduces himself as Arcs Leafort, and announces that he is reporting for duty. Kneeling on one knee, Arcs takes Eleanor's hand. He declares that from this day forward he will serve as her personal attendant. Eleanor looks surprised. The scene shifts. Mansion staff rush about making last-minute preparations for a large event. They discuss a shortage of glasses and a change to the aperitif. A slightly older Arcs sighs. His narration explains that 3 years have passed since he became a servant, and Eleanor is about to turn 10 years old. The narration continues, explaining that milestone 10th birthdays are celebrated with lavish parties. The entire household is busy with preparations. Arcs thinks to himself that this will be his first time attending a party for nobles. A maid approaches Arcs at his desk and informs him that the hall preparations are complete. Arcs thanks the maid Nanai-san for her hard work and comments that she looks tired. Stretching in his chair, Arcs agrees that the day before an event always gets hectic. Nanai-san tells Arcs that thanks to his help they are fully prepared for the party tomorrow. Arcs smiles, saying that is good to hear. Arcs's narration begins as he looks over his desk. He thinks that for some reason, despite only being 10, he has found himself in charge of overseeing the entire party. A flashback shows a younger Arcs running through the halls with a stack of papers as another staff member calls out for his help. In another memory, a maid asks Arcs for guidance on a particular task. Arcs wonders how he ended up in this position. He recalls offering common-sense suggestions from his past life, which led to the staff declaring him the boss. Nanai-san tells Arcs he is amazing. She notes that he not only has great ideas but also takes the initiative to act on them himself. Arcs explains that he is doing it all for Eleanor. He says it's their first big party since they met, and he wants to celebrate extravagantly to see her smile. He declares that a little fatigue is nothing compared to achieving his goal. Arcs uses magic chanting Create Stone as a light emanates from his hand. He materializes a large stone club. Nanai-san looks on in surprise. After using revitalization magic on himself, Arcs announces that he is off to do some training. Nanai-san asks if he wasn't tired just a moment ago, noticing he has already changed clothes. Arcs encourages Nanai-san to do her best as well. He wishes her a good day and says he will see her tomorrow. Nanai-san stands speechless as he leaves. Later that night, Arcs is outside in the garden, swinging the stone club as part of his training. As Arcs concludes his training for the day, someone calls his name from behind. Turning, Arcs sees Eleanor in the garden. He asks how long she has been there, and she replies that she was watching for a while. Arcs apologizes with a smile, explaining he was so focused on his training that he did not notice her. Eleanor asks why he is outside so late, telling him he will catch a cold in the cool air. She then tells Arcs that even if she gets cold, he will be there to warm her up. Arcs questions her statement. Arcs thinks to himself that there are spells to create fire or raise body temperature, and wonders why she would not use one herself. Eleanor states that he has been so busy lately he barely comes to see her. Arcs reminds her that they spoke just the other day. Eleanor states that as her servant he should always be by her side. She then corrects herself after saying he belongs to her. Arcs apologizes, explaining that while he would like to spend more time with her, he is busy with the party preparations. Eleanor places her gloved hand on his chest. Arcs takes her hand and explains his work is for her party tomorrow so they can give her a magnificent celebration. Eleanor accepts his explanation, saying it cannot be helped, since tomorrow is an important day. She falls silent for a moment, looking down. Looking up at Arcs, Eleanor asks if he is lonely. She suggests they go back inside because it is getting cold. Arcs tells her he is not lonely. He explains that her father and the other servants have been kind, making him feel welcome. Eleanor tells Arx to handle the party preparations tomorrow and begins to walk away. Watching her go, Arx wonders if he said something to upset her. As they walk back toward the mansion, Eleanor lets out a small sneeze. A strong gust of wind blows past both of them. Arx is confused by the sudden turn of events while Eleanor continues walking in silence. The next day the party is in full swing. Count Adalbert addresses the crowd, thanking the ladies and gentlemen for gathering. The Count calls for Arx, who is standing among the guests. With a severe expression, Count Adalbert privately orders Arx to eliminate all the pests who try to get close to Eleanor. Arx breaks into a sweat and agrees to the Count's demand. Later, while observing the guests from a balcony, Arx notices two boys talking with each other. He thinks they look familiar, certain he has seen them somewhere before. One of the boys looks up seemingly in Arc's direction. Startled, Arx quickly turns away, thinking he might have been caught staring. He cautiously peeks back over the railing, wondering if they noticed him. Arx looks back to find the two boys are gone. He wonders where they could have gone. Count Adalbert's voice announces the main event. He welcomes the star of the day, Eleanor, and tells the crowd to feast their eyes on her. Eleanor enters the ballroom in a formal gown. The guests turn their attention to her. Escorted by a maid, Eleanor descends the grand staircase as the party guests watch. From the crowd, Arx watches her. Eleanor's eyes meet his, and she smiles at him. Internally, Arx thinks about how much Eleanor has grown in 3 years. He reflects on his role as the party's overseer, which requires him to manage things from a distance instead of being by her side. From behind, Nanai-san whispers his name. Arx approaches her and asks what is wrong, reminding her that she was supposed to be guarding Eleanor. With an uncertain expression, Nanai-san begins to explain the situation. Arx looks at her with a confused expression. The scene shifts. Arx is now sitting in a throne-like chair next to Eleanor. He internally questions how he ended up on display. He feels the guests' eyes on him, assuming they are wondering who the boy sitting next to the guest of honor is. Eleanor turns to him with a concerned look. She notes that he looks pale and asks if he is all right. Sweating, Arx internally wonders whose fault the situation is. In response to his expression, Eleanor pouts. A flashback begins explaining how Arx ended up in this situation. In the flashback, Eleanor noted that Arx was never by her side, despite being her attendant. Arx replied that it was inappropriate for a servant to sit beside the guest of honor. Arx voiced his concern about the guest's opinions, prompting Eleanor to state that he was not just any servant. Blushing, Eleanor said that Arx deserved to be celebrated as well. Arx paused at her statement and quietly asked if she was referring to him. Eleanor pointed out that Arx was about the same age as her. Arx confirmed this. She then added that despite their similar age, no one was celebrating his birthday. Arx recalled previously telling Eleanor that he was around 10 years old and did not know his exact birth date, which was why he had never had a proper celebration. He looked at Eleanor, understanding her intentions. Arx realized she had seated him beside her as an equal to celebrate him as well. He thought to himself that she had a beautiful heart. He reflected on how much she had grown from the pessimistic child she once was. Looking at the kind person she had become, Arx felt certain she could never turn into the game's final boss. The flashback ends. Arx tells Eleanor that while it is an honor, her celebrating for him is enough to make him happy. Visibly flustered by his comment, Eleanor stammers that she understands. She asks if they can spend time together after the party. Arx agrees, adding that he wants to ensure the event is perfect for her. As they speak, Arc's thoughts return to the two boys who had disappeared from the party earlier. With the two boys still on his mind, Arx clasps his hands together. He looks down from the balcony where he and Eleanor are seated, surveying the party guests below. His thoughts are interrupted as Eleanor offers him a bite of food from her fork, asking if he has tried it yet. Arx has an uncomfortable expression. He internally notes his awkward situation, as Eleanor offers him another dish. Arx then realizes that the party guests are staring at him, their expressions, questioning who he is. Suddenly, a young man from the crowd calls out to Eleanor. The young man bows and asks Countess Eleanor Ancinous for a dance. Arx recognizes him as one of the boys from earlier. A memory of the game's interface flashes in Arc's mind. He recalls seeing the young man's face on a character profile screen. Looking down at the young man, Arx realizes who he is. He identifies him as Razor Kilmond, son of a Viscount. Arx realizes why he did not recognize him at first. Reijou is much younger now than he was at the start of the original game. He recalls Reijou's persona from the game, a foul-mouthed and violent character who was popular for his devotion to the protagonist. Arx also remembers a line where Reijou dismisses someone as a background extra. Arx confirms to himself that Reijou is one of the main romance options from the game. Reijou repeats his request to Eleanor for a dance. Eleanor turns her head toward the young man, repeating his request as a question. Looking down at Reijou, Eleanor states that she understands. With a flat expression, Eleanor refuses Reijou's request. Arx reacts with surprise. Reijou demands to know why she turned him down. Eleanor tells him she has no desire to dance with him. She begins to add another reason for her refusal. Before she can finish, Reijou lunges forward, shouting at her. Arx steps between them and catches Reijou's wrist, stopping his advance. Arx glares at Reijou with a serious expression. Reijou looks at his restrained wrist, surprised by the intervention. Arx introduces himself as Arx Lefort, Eleanor's attendant. Reijou reacts with confusion. Reijou tells Arx to know his place as a servant. Arx tightens his grip on Reijou's wrist, stating that his job is to protect Eleanor. He adds that he intends to fulfill his duty. With a push, Arx sends Reijou stumbling backward. Reijou calls this brutality, insisting he was only asking for a dance. Arx tells him to calm down, warning that escalating the situation will bring shame to his family. When Reijou asks why, Arx explains that it would be a problem if a Viscount's son were to harm the daughter of a higher-ranking noble, or her servant. After Arx points out the potential damage to his family's reputation, Reijou sighs, unable to respond. Standing in front of Eleanor, Arx offers a deal. He tells Reijou that if he backs down, Arx will not report the incident to Count Adalbert. Reijou agrees, stating that he understands. Arx lets out a silent sigh of relief. Just as Arx turns away, Reijou grabs his hand. Reijou gives Arx a smirk. Reijou suddenly yanks Arx forward, throwing him off balance. Thrown off balance, Arx asks what Reijou is doing. Without answering, Reijou throws a punch at Arx. Arx watches the incoming fist, his expression unchanged. Shouting that he has been disgraced, Reijou swings his fist toward Arc's head. In response, Arx holds up his hand and casts a sleep spell. The spell hits Reijou mid-swing, and his eyes grow heavy. Reijou loses consciousness and collapses onto Arx. Catching the unconscious Reijou, Arx calls for Nanai-san and tells her to summon Reijou's father and Count Adalbert. Eleanor rushes toward Arx, calling his name. In the background, Reijou's father and Count Adalbert approach as Arx holds the unconscious Reijou. Ignoring his own condition, Arx turns to Eleanor and asks if she is hurt. A small scrape is visible on his cheek. Eleanor tells Arx that he should be worried about himself, not her. She looks at him with concern. Reaching out, Eleanor touches the scrape on Arc's cheek. She asks him if he is okay. Eleanor points out that his cheek is swollen. Arx smiles and tells her it is no big deal. Arx tells Eleanor he is just glad that she is safe. She looks back at him, her expression softening. After the situation is handled, Viscount Kilman formally thanks Arx. From a distance, Eleanor watches them. The other boy, Reijou's brother, gets on his hands and knees in a deep bow. He apologizes for his brother's behavior. Arx recognizes the gesture as a dogeza, a formal apology bow. He quickly tells the boy that there is no need to worry about it. Sweating, Arx pleads with the boy to raise his head. Arx internally identifies the boy as Caesar Kilmand. He remembers from his past life that Caesar is one of the game's main love interests. He recalls Caesar's in-game persona as the gentle, soft-spoken prince type who was popular with players. As Caesar continues to apologize, Arx thinks that having a difficult younger brother must be tough. Caesar explains that his little brother has been spoiled and thinks he is entitled to get anything he wants. Arx asks if Reijou's only intention was to dance with Eleanor. Caesar quietly confirms it was. Internally, Arx compares Reijou's behavior to that of a grade schooler. He then remembers that by age, Reijou is a child. Caesar sighs, explaining that the incident happened because he told Reijou he should ask any girl who catches his eye to dance. Arx glances over at the couch where Reijou is still asleep. He turns back to Caesar and asks what will happen to Reijou. Caesar explains that while the decision is up to Count Adalbert, the least Reijou can expect is exile. Arx repeats the word exile. Arx has a brief flashback to playing a fantasy game in his past life. He internally reflects on the word exile, a term he only knows from fiction, and reminds himself the situation is serious. Looking at the sleeping Reijou, Arx considers that, at 10 years old, Reijou is considered an adult in this world. He thinks that while the punishment might be fair, it would be better if Reijou remained asleep. Arx pauses as a thought crosses his mind. He wonders if the world is diverging from the game's story, recalling a notification that Razor's route is now closed. He hopes this means Eleanor's fate can also be changed. The door opens and Eleanor calls out Arcs's name. She asks if everything is okay, noting he was gone for a while. Arx smiles and tells her he is fine, adding that there were witnesses to the incident. He explains it took time for the Killmans to apologize. A flashback shows Viscount Killman and Caesar bowing to him. Eleanor sighs in relief and says she understands. Arx then apologizes for ruining her birthday party. Eleanor asks why he is apologizing, insisting the fault lies with the other man's behavior. Arx blames himself for the incident, telling Eleanor that he was too naive and should have been able to prevent it. He continues to blame himself, thinking that if he had checked the guest list, he could have removed Razor before an invitation was sent. Eleanor softly says Arcs's name, her expression unreadable. She steps forward and places her hands on Arcs's cheeks, startling him. Eleanor tells him that as long as she has him, she does not care about anyone else. Caught off guard by her declaration, Arx gasps. Blushing and looking down, Eleanor adds that the party is not ruined just yet. Confused, Arx watches as she turns and opens the doors to a balcony. She looks back over her shoulder and asks Arx if he would like to go outside. Standing in the garden under the night sky, Arx asks Eleanor if she danced with anyone at the party. Eleanor replies that she did not, which surprises Arx. She explains that she turned down all other dance requests. Her revelation leaves Arx speechless. He internally reflects that dancing is the essence of noble society, a centerpiece for finding a partner and forging connections. He realizes that for a noble lady like Eleanor, this party was a crucial social event for her future. Confused by her decision to throw away an important social opportunity, Arx asks Eleanor why she would do that. Blushing, Eleanor confesses it was because she wanted her first dance to be with him. Arx is stunned by her admission. Eleanor continues explaining that she wanted to ask him the day before. Arx asks if she really means with him. Looking down, she admits that she could not find the courage to ask him then. Arx realizes this was the reason for her behavior during their conversation the previous night. He asks if she is okay with someone like him confessing that he has never danced before. Eleanor smiles and reassures him that she is not very good at it either. Spreading her arms wide, she tells him that no one will see them in the garden, and that not even the moon is watching. Smiling, Arx agrees, saying that if they mess up, there is nothing to be embarrassed about. Eleanor adds that even if he trips, she will be the only one there to see it. She formally asks Arx if he would do her the honor of taking her hand. Arx accepts, telling her the honor is all his. Under the starry sky, Arx and Eleanor share their first dance in the garden. Sometime later, back inside the party hall, Arx is swarmed by several nobles. They offer him positions in their households and tell him to name his price. The nobles praise Arx for his handling of the Killman heir. They note his magical skill and precision, insisting they would love for him to work for them. Internally, Arx tells himself to calm down. He understands that the nobles are trying to scout him, due to his performance during the incident with Razor. With a flustered expression, Arx begins to apologize to the nobles surrounding him, trying to turn down their numerous offers. From a distance, Eleanor watches as Arx is surrounded by two other nobles. She looks on with a confused expression. With a smile, Arx declares to the nobles that he is Eleanor's servant, making his allegiance clear. He then rushes over to Eleanor's side, still smiling. Eleanor looks at him with a questioning expression. As Eleanor processes what just happened, Arx leans in closer to her. Eleanor closes her eyes and smiles. A narration box announces that the long birthday party has finally come to an end. Arx narrates that he thought he would finally be able to relax after the party concluded. However, he corrects himself, remembering that parties require cleanup, in addition to preparation. He sits exhausted in the empty, messy hall. While carrying cleaning supplies along a corridor, Arx wonders if they can finish all the work before midnight. Completely drained, Arx thinks to himself that he hopes his position will be an easier one next time. As he is working, someone knocks on the door and calls out his name. Nanai-san bursts in and announces that the venue cleanup is complete. Arx asks how she could have finished already. With a smile, Nanai-san confirms that she has finished her work. Nanai-san explains that everyone was inspired to work harder after seeing Arx give his all for the party. Arx asks if he was really the reason. Nanai-san confirms that he was. Blushing, Arx says that is a little embarrassing. He realizes this is why the post-party cleanup finished so quickly. Nanai-san smiles and adds that since Eleanor seemed to enjoy herself, all their effort was worthwhile. Arcs agrees, stating that he can say that with confidence. As they walk, Nanai-san remarks that watching him takes her back. Arcs asks what she means. She tells him she remembers holding a party for her childhood friend's 10th birthday when they were children. Nanai-san explains that they were both orphans, and the party was modest. Her only goal was to give her friend a reason to smile. She tells Arcs that she saw a bit of her old self in his actions. Nanai-san then remarks that Arcs and Eleanor are like childhood friends too. Her comment takes Arcs by surprise. He repeats the words childhood friends with a troubled expression. Nanai-san confirms her observation with a smile, saying their relationship makes her feel nostalgic. Internally, Arcs feels that something is off. He questions whether a character like Eleanor's childhood friend ever existed in the original game. He tries to dismiss his concern, reasoning that his own existence has already made the story irregular. Still, he cannot shake a feeling of unease. Nanai-san calls out his name, noticing he has grown quiet and seems lost in thought. Nanai-san asks Arcs if he is alright, noting that he seems distracted. Arcs tells her he is fine and was just lost in thought. Nanai-san tells Arcs he must be exhausted and should get to bed early. She is then called away by another maid and excuses herself. Nanai-san turns to the other staff members and encourages them to give the cleanup one last push. Arcs agrees with her but internally feels sleepy. He reminds himself that he still has his own work to finish. Sometime later, Arcs runs through a hallway. He realizes he had fallen asleep. He remembers his promise to visit Eleanor once the cleanup was finished. A mental image of a disappointed Eleanor appears in his mind. Arcs shivers, thinking that his failure to show up will make Eleanor upset with him for an entire week. A brief flashback shows Arcs asleep on the floor moments earlier. As he rushes down the corridor, Arcs suddenly stops, having heard a sound. He looks around the empty hallway but sees nothing. He concludes that he must have imagined the noise. Arriving at Eleanor's room, Arcs knocks on the door. He announces himself and apologizes for being late. After a moment of silence, Arcs thinks Eleanor must have gone to sleep. He decides not to wake her and to apologize the next morning. He quietly opens the door to check on her. As the door opens, black shadowy tendrils shoot out from inside the room. They wrap around Arcs's leg and pull him off his feet. Arcs cries out as he is dragged into the dark room. He wonders what is happening as the shadows pull him further inside. Inside the darkened room, Arcs calls out Eleanor's name twice. He looks around but the room is empty. Panting, Arcs wonders where Eleanor is and if something has happened to her. Now on the floor, Arcs realizes he is unable to move his body. He tells himself he has to get up. He continues to lie on the floor, struggling to stand. A voice calls Arcs's name. Looking up, he sees Eleanor standing over him. Still on the floor, Arcs looks up at her. Eleanor is surrounded by the same dark tendrils that captured him. Arcs says her name, adding the formal title Sama. She pouts and tells Arcs he is late. The scene changes to Arcs sitting at a table across from Eleanor. She asks if it is true he has been working so much that he has barely eaten. Eleanor tells Arcs she has prepared special sweets just for him. As she speaks, she ties a napkin around his neck. Standing behind him with a cheerful grin, Eleanor tells him to eat up. Arcs has a shocked expression on his face. Arcs hesitates, explaining that Nanai-san will scold him for eating sweets so late at night. Eleanor picks up a cookie. She tells him that if that is the case, he should consider her his partner in crime. She brings the cookie to Arcs's mouth and tells him to open up and say, "Ah." As Eleanor feeds him, Arcs wonders how the situation ended up like this. Arcs takes the cookie from her hand and addresses her formally as Eleanor Sama. Eleanor looks away, blushing, and says it is fine for him to eat sweets late, reminding him that it is still her birthday. Arcs holds Eleanor's hand and asks about the shadowy magic she used on him earlier. Eleanor stares back at him. Instead of answering, she asks Arcs to make some tea. He agrees. As Arcs gets up, he flinches, seeing dark tendrils of magic begin to swirl around Eleanor again. From across the room, Arcs watches Eleanor stand surrounded by her dark shadowy power. Eleanor explains that this power is her Celestia, a form of magic bestowed upon every person. Through internal narration, Arcs recalls the game's lore. Each individual in the Celestia kingdom receives their own unique Celestia. Turning back to her, Arcs asks how long she has been able to use this power. While preparing the tea, Arcs thinks to himself that he knew about Eleanor's Celestia from the game. He recalls scenes where she used that same power to commit atrocities. Realizing he is now seeing this power in person, Arx shudders as he pours the tea. Seeing his reaction, Eleanor apologizes, saying she did not mean to frighten him. She explains that her power first manifested about a month ago, and that she woke up to find it pouring out of her uncontrollably. Arx asks if she has really had the power for that long. Arx asks Eleanor why she did not tell him about her power sooner. She begins to explain. Eleanor looks down and says she was afraid he would hate her if he knew about her Celestia. Arx tells her that is not true. Internally he admits that seeing her power was terrifying, and that he now understands why she was called a cursed child and an enemy of humanity. Eleanor smiles and demonstrates how she can use the shadowy tendrils to carry things, saying her power is actually very handy. Her smile fades and she falls silent with a somber expression. Eleanor explains that earlier at the party when Reijou pushed Arx, she accidentally let some of her power leak out. A flashback shows Reijou pushing Arx at the party. The flashback shows Eleanor's dark tendrils lashing out uncontrollably. She recalls the party guests flinching away when they saw her magic. Eleanor says that seeing the nobles' reactions made her realize the truth about herself. Surrounded by her dark magic, Eleanor questions if she really is a cursed person. She tells Arx that her power stirs no matter how she tries to suppress it, and that he will eventually leave her too, just like everyone else. Arx tells Eleanor that he would never abandon her. Eleanor looks away. She tells Arx that the last person who made that promise before disappearing was her own mother. Arx thinks about Eleanor's mother. He realizes her mother was never shown in the game story, and that in all his time at the mansion, Eleanor had never once mentioned her. In a flashback, Eleanor recalls her childhood. She explains that, although she couldn't control her magic, her mother was the only one who held her close when everyone else rejected her. She remembers her mother promising that she would never leave her. Eleanor recalls this memory with tears in her eyes. The flashback shows Eleanor's mother smiling gently. Eleanor explains that her mother disappeared by the time she turned 5. She tells Arx she heard her mother return to her family home and does not intend to see her again. Arx now understands the reason for the sadness in Eleanor's eyes when they first met and realizes the pain she has endured. He acknowledges the emotional scars she carries. Eleanor looks down with a sad expression, saying that being abandoned is her fate. Arx thinks to himself that he cannot change the fact that her mother left her. Despite this, Arx grabs Eleanor by the shoulders and calls out her name. Eleanor looks up at him with wide, startled eyes. Internally, Arx resolves to accept her, just as she is. He tells her that being abandoned is not her fate. Arx admits that her Celestia might frighten people, and that some may even reprimand her for it. But even so, Arx looks at her directly and promises that he will keep holding her hand. After Arx makes his promise, a long silence hangs between them as they continue to sit and hold hands. Arx begins to sweat, thinking he went too far with his declaration, and that it must have sounded strange. Eleanor quietly says that she is hopeless. Arx does not understand her comment. Eleanor lets out a small chuckle. Wiping a tear from her eye, she smiles and tells Arx she was hoping he would say that. Arx looks at her. He places a hand on her cheek and promises to say it as many times as it takes because he means every word. Arx pulls Eleanor into a hug, thinking his one desire is to protect her. As he embraces her, he internally vows to protect her as a friend and as a servant. He thinks about the different roles he plays in her life. He adds one more role to his promise, her childhood friend. Arx silently reflects on his vow. He wonders why Eleanor fell into darkness in the original game. He had thought it was due to childhood discrimination, but now understands the true cause. Eleanor tells Arx that if he were ever to leave, she thinks she would fall apart. She explains that the mere thought of him being gone is terrifying to her. Still holding Eleanor, Arx tells her not to say such things. A memory surfaces in Arc's mind. He realizes that he now remembers a critical piece of the game's plot. He recalls that the childhood friend is fated to vanish from the story. The memory takes him back to his past life, where he is seen reading a guide for the Otome game. He remembers the profile page for the game's final boss. It detailed how a once calm and sensitive Eleanor fell into darkness after a tragic event. The guide explained her descent was triggered by the loss of a close friend at the hands of a villainous noble. Arx realizes that he is the friend who is fated to die 5 years after the game's start, and his death is what turns Eleanor into the final boss. Eleanor's voice calls his name, pulling him back to the present. She asks him to let her believe his promise that he will always stay with her. As Arx agrees, he has the thought that he will eventually betray her. He watches Eleanor smile. He feels as if the magical power within Eleanor is the source of this premonition. The scene changes to Ark's training. He is knocked to the ground during a sparring match, crying out in pain. The villager he is sparring with tells him he is covered in cuts and asks if he is serious about continuing. From the ground, Arx asks for one more round. Pushing himself up, Arx grits his teeth and insists that he is fine. He clenches his sword, his determination renewed by the knowledge of his fate. Knowing his fate, Arx trains relentlessly. He believes he has 5 years or possibly less to become strong enough to survive. His sparring partner, the villager, suggests they take a break. Panting and using healing magic on his chest, Arx insists he is fine and that his injuries are nothing. The villager looks at Arx, telling him that was not what he meant. The villager's thoughts reveal his true concern is for Eleanor, who watches from a distance. He notes her glare intensifies each time he knocks Arx down. The villager puts a hand on Arx's shoulder and insists they take a break. Arx agrees. Eleanor steps forward, and Arx calls out her name. Arx asks why she watched from afar instead of saying something. Eleanor replies that she did not want to interrupt his training. When Arx asks about her lessons with Nanai-san, Eleanor tells him she has already finished. She leans her head against Arx's shoulder, looking up at him with a smile. Eleanor tells Arx he can praise her for completing her studies. Arx pats her on the head and calls her amazing. Eleanor grins. The scene shifts to a flashback of the party as Arx reflects. He recalls the game's description of the final boss. He now understands his purpose has been to prevent Eleanor's fall into darkness, an event triggered by the death of her childhood friend. Arx recalls Caesar Killman's apology. He had believed that moment signified he had successfully altered the story's tragic course. He concludes his reflection with the thought that he has not managed to change their fate at all. As Arx continues his reflection, he closes his eyes, considering the futility of his efforts. He thinks that if he dies, Eleanor will become a ruthless, heartless person, leading to her own death as the final boss, the one outcome he must prevent. While Eleanor rests her head in his lap, Arx admits to himself that he considered pushing her away to make her hate him. She calls his name, interrupting his thoughts. Eleanor asks him to pet her more, and to do it properly. As he pats her head, Arx concludes that pushing her away would be worse than facing his own death. Eleanor's attachment to him strengthens his resolve. He tells himself that he does not want to die either. Arx concludes that his only choice is to become the strongest and survive his fate. As he is lost in thought, Eleanor continues to stare at him. She tells Arx that he has been acting strange lately. Arx stammers, unable to come up with a response. The villager Arx was sparring with steps in, asking Eleanor to cut him some slack. Arx thinks that he can never tell her the truth about his fated death. Putting a hand on Arx's shoulder, the villager explains that Arx is just trying to show her his good side for the ritual of trials. Arx is silent at the mention of the ritual of trials. The villager continues explaining to Eleanor that Arx got fired up about it as soon as he turned 10. Arx asks if that is really the case. Seeing his reaction, Eleanor calls out his name. She asks if he is all right, noting that he looks pale. Arx apologizes, says he just remembered something urgent, and turns to walk away with her. As he walks, Arx's mind races. He thinks about his terrible oversight, wondering how he could have forgotten something so important. With a stressed expression, Arx continues to think about his realization. He clutches his face as he remembers the ritual of trials. He realizes this is the event where he is most likely to meet his fated end. Arx recalls the details of the ceremony, a trial, where 10-year-old children venture into a dungeon to test their abilities and courage. He thinks that while the trial is supposed to guarantee the children's safety, it is the most likely place for an unforeseen event to happen. Looking down at his hand, Arx wonders what he must do to survive. Facing a large door, he questions what actions he must take to avoid dying. After a deep sigh, Arx opens the doors. He resolves that he absolutely refuses to die. A montage shows Arx preparing for the trial. He studies books on magic theory late into the night and practices his spells. The montage continues, showing Arx sparring with the villager to improve his combat skills. The day before the trial, Arx sits at his desk reviewing his research. He notes that he will have to watch out for poisonous creatures in the dungeon. Leaning back in his chair, he reflects that he has done everything he can to prepare. He still wonders if he is fated to die tomorrow. Slumping over his desk, Arx thinks it is unfair that he does not even know how he is supposed to be killed. He looks out his window, considering what kind of death would be traumatic enough to drive Eleanor into darkness. Reaching his hand toward the window pane, Arx wonders how the original Arx died in the game's plot. The day of the ritual of trials arrives. Standing at the entrance to a dark forest with Eleanor, Arx confirms their objective is to reach the center. Eleanor looks ahead into the woods and begins to tremble. Gripping the hilt of his sword, Arx tells her not to worry. He takes her hand and promises to protect her. Eleanor looks at him and asks if he is not scared himself. Internally, Arx admits that he is terrified. He reflects that he has been scared ever since he realized he was fated to die. Despite his own fear, Arx smiles at Eleanor and tells her he is much more afraid of her getting hurt. His words cause her to blush and stammer. Looking up at him with a serious expression, Eleanor tells Arx she will be counting on him if things get dangerous. Arx agrees. He reminds himself that he has done everything he possibly could to prepare for this moment. He clenches his fist. Arx thinks that all he has left to do is believe in himself and his training. Arx tells Eleanor it is time to go. Together they walk into the forest to begin the ritual of trials.